On a recent family holiday, I got chatting with my uncle, and I found out that he'd been on a retreat for psilocybin, also known as magic mushrooms. This really took me by surprise. It was the first time I'd heard about it being used for medical purposes, and his positive experience made me want to learn more about it. It made me wonder why, after making psychedelics illegal and viewing them as having a negative impact on our physical and mental health, we are now turning to them to treat mental illness. There is a lot of stigma around the use of illegal drugs. Growing up, I have been inundated by warnings about the dangers of these substances. Finding out that illegal psychedelics, if used in the right context, could actually have a positive effect caught me by surprise and made me want to research it further. My research and the topic of my discussion is on how psilocybin can be used to treat depression. Poor mental health is affecting a growing number of people in today's world, and though it is more talked about, it remains a taboo subject for many. Linked to this, depression is one of the most prevalent mental health disorders. According to Champion Health, in the UK, it affects around 1 in 6 adults. At the moment, the most common treatment for depression are different types of talking therapies and antidepressants. Whilst antidepressants can be very useful and effective, around 20% of patients with major depressive disorder are treatment resistant, meaning that they have not been helped by 2 or more antidepressants. In the UK, 8.3 million people have had a depressive episode during their adult life. Of that, 20%, meaning 1.6 million people, are treatment resistant. Being treatment resistant can have very severe consequences, such as leading to suicide. It is clear we are facing a crisis, with billions spent on treatment-resistant patients and soaring rates of poor mental health. It is time to look for new, alternative treatments. Yet, there has been reluctance to explore alternative treatments, such as psychedelics, since they were first developed in the 1950s. Since the 1950s and Nixon's war on drugs, psychedelics have been classed as Class A drugs, the same class as cocaine and heroin. Due to their association with more harmful drugs, psychedelics have been greatly stigmatized, and the process of legalizing them is long and complex. However, people are beginning to see the potential these drugs hold. In order to understand how psilocybin can help cure depression, it's important to understand what happens in a brain suffering from this mental illness. When triggered, depression is linked to the shrinkage of 2 major parts of the brain: the hippocampus, linked to memory, and the cortex, the thinking part of the brain. Both the size of the nerve cells and the number of their connection with other neurons is reduced. At the same time, depressive behavior is linked to the overactivity of the hypothalamus, which coordinates the stress response, and overactivation of the amygdala, which signals threats and generates negative emotions. Furthermore, one singularity of the human brain is its ability to generate new nerve connections, known as neuroplasticity, which correlates with a healthy mind. However, in depression, this neuroplasticity is impaired, which causes us to get stuck in negative ways of thinking. Finally, serotonin is a neurotransmitter which sends us the signal to calm down. This is where psilocybin comes in. When serotonin levels are low, it imitates serotonin, and it also induces malleability and plasticity, which the brain is lacking, and thereby frees things up so that we can change them. However, it isn't as simple as just picking some mushrooms in the Mendes. While psilocybin can, in exceptional cases, lead to fear, anxiety, or hallucinations, it is seeming to look like it is a relatively safe, natural drug, and has yielded promising results. It is time we put profit aside and take a holistic, more natural approach to treating mental illness. There is a very specific protocol for treating people with psilocybin. First, the patients are screened for suitability. Here, all their medical records are checked, so is their mental health condition and their susceptibility to psilocybin therapy. During this stage, they are informed of what to expect during the treatment and are prepared for it psychologically. The treatment must take place in a safe, comfortable space where distraction is minimal and encourages introspection and emotional exploration. This could be in a therapist's office or a specialized clinic. Then, the patients are administered a predetermined dosage of psilocybin that is calibrated just for them, based on factors including their weight, tolerance, and possible past experience with psychedelics. The aim is to induce a therapeutic, almost dreamlike state, rather than overwhelming the patient. Throughout the session, the patients are in presence of a trained therapist who is there to offer guidance, support, and reassurance when needed. The therapist also enables conversations and encourages introspection, but also helps the patient navigate challenging emotions and experiences that might arise during the treatment. When taking psilocybin, as shown by brain scans, the brain is more interconnected with itself, which means that parts of the brain that don't usually communicate together can. During the treatment, the drug rewires the cortex, which resets the brain into a healthy mode of functioning. A metaphor that is often used is that when depressed, our thoughts and actions are like sledges, going down a slope, forming deeper and deeper grooves that we can't get out of. And when we take psychedelics, it's like having a fresh dump of snow, and suddenly we have freedom to go where we want to. One of the most important stages takes place after the effects of the drug have worn off. It's called integration therapy. The effect the drug produces allows us to access and relive memories or feelings that we have repressed. If someone suffers trauma as a child, they build up psychological protection to prevent them reliving the trauma. Depression can be a coping mechanism which suppresses these painful feelings. This step involves integrating insights gained during the experience into their daily lives. It can take place in the days, weeks, or even months following the treatment. And it's essential in maximizing the long-term therapeutic benefits. Though research is still ongoing, it has yielded promising results. A 2020 study, led by researchers from Johns Hopkins Medicine, found that 2 doses of psilocybin and supportive therapy led to rapid, significant antidepressant effects. About 67% of patients experienced a 50% decrease in depressive symptoms. And 4 weeks later, 54% reported not being depressed anymore. Psilocybin helps people feel more connected to others and the world around them, contradicting our individualist society. People suffering from depression feel very disconnected and alone, as if a wall had been put up around them, separating them from society. The way in which psilocybin works, by rewiring the brain and addressing the root cause of mental illness, rather than simply veiling the symptoms, is revolutionary. Of course, there is still a lot of research needing to be conducted, and lots of ethical considerations that need to be taken into account. But the momentum is building, and it is becoming increasingly obvious that we cannot afford to ignore the potential these drugs hold any longer. Coming back to the beginning, I wanted to know what effect it had had on my uncle. And he told me that it helped him realize that we are not our thoughts. This really struck me as significant, because we have about 6,000 thoughts a day, and we allow our thoughts to shape the way in which we view the world. If we are able to separate out our negative thoughts about ourselves, it gives us great freedom for self-acceptance, which is a fundamental yearning we all have. In this world of negativity, If psilocybin can simply give someone with depression a more positive image of themselves, I believe that continued scientific curiosity in this area could be groundbreaking. Thank you for listening.
I would now invite you, members of the audience, to offer your questions.
What do you think about legalizing drugs?
Psilocybin in particular.
Well, or not necessarily hard drugs, but cannabis and things like that.
I think that, obviously it's quite subjective and there are pros and cons to both views, but I think for cannabis that isn't a Class A drug, it can have positive effects because it would get rid of the black market, and it allows people who consume it to know where it's coming from and know what they are consuming is what they are actually wanting to consume and not something that someone sold them. But I think that it can also potentially increase consumption, which could have negative effects on society.
We have 3 questions per speaker, so there are 2 more questions which we're able to answer this evening.
Having watched you in the Euros, have you got any free samples?
I'm afraid not. I did think about bringing some, but I was told I couldn't.
If we are all to believe in the benefit of psychedelics, what can we do as a public to help the pharmaceutical industry bring that through to the market?
I think that one of the main things we can do is just raise awareness about it. I think that it's still a very new topic, and I don't know if a lot of you knew about it, but it's something that I only found out about recently. So I think that first of all we need to raise awareness and make people see the effects that it has and show them concrete results that they can't really ignore, and show the positive effects that it's having and all the trials they've run.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Do you remember your first date? Take yourself back there for a moment. The setting, what you wore, what you ate. Do you remember what you talked about? Normally on the first date, people would ask, what's your favorite meal? What kind of music do you like? What type of books do you read? Well, my mom, a middle-aged Nigerian lady at the time, desperate to get married and please the nosy aunties who couldn't go a day without ringing her up, asking why she hadn't found a husband yet. My mom asked something very different. Something I bet none of you sat here in this room would even think to ask on a first date. My mom dived straight in. And no, before you think you guessed it, she didn't ask my dad to marry her 2 minutes into the conversation. She's not that crazy. What she did ask, though, would seem very bizarre to some of you here. But bear with me for a moment, and I'll reveal this mystery question to you in due time. Fast forward to September 2020, a good few years after this mystery question was asked, my parents booked me a one-way ticket to the United Kingdom, hoping I'll be provided with a wider range of educational opportunity, which will in turn secure me a better future. This meant I was immediately counted amongst the 312,000 plus Nigerian immigrants living in the UK. Undoubtedly, Nigerian contribution to the British community and economy over the past few years has been extraordinary. The list of successful Nigerians that have become household names here in the UK goes on and on and on. It may surprise you to know that within the NHS, 25% of healthcare workers of African heritage are indeed Nigerian. Additionally, at higher education level, Nigerian students and their dependents are estimated to contribute over £1.9 billion to the UK's economy each year. Despite this large population of Nigerians, yet alone Africans living in the UK, there is little to no understanding of my topic today, sickle cell disease, and few treatment options available. The sickle trait, which causes this very disease, is present in roughly 25% of the Nigerian population. Nigerian immigrants have given their all to contribute to British society, yet current inequalities in healthcare that still persist in 2024 here in the United Kingdom have resulted in many Nigerians being left with inadequate treatment at British hospitals. So what is sickle cell disease? Sickle cell disease is a group of inherited red blood cell disorders that affect hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen around the body. Normally, red blood cells are dish-shaped and flexible enough to move easily through the blood vessels. However, an individual who suffers from sickle cell disease has red blood cells that are sickle or crescent-shaped. Now, because of this distinct shape, these red blood cells do not move easily through the blood, and so they can block blood flow to the rest of the body. As you would expect, this blocked blood flow can lead to serious problems, including stroke, eye problems, infections, episodes of pain called pain crises. And unfortunately, individuals with sickle cell disease have a life expectancy that is 20 to 30 years shorter than the general population. As previously mentioned, sickle cell disease is inherited, meaning it is caused by a gene which can be passed on from parent to offspring. When this gene is passed on, the child may either have sickle cell disease and live with the effects that come with these sickle-shaped red blood cells. However, they may simply be a carrier, meaning they don't necessarily suffer the effects of sickle cell disease themselves, but they can continue to pass it on to their offspring. The only way a child will have sickle cell disease and suffer its effects is if both, not just one, but both parents have the sickle gene. So how does this affect the 312,000 plus Nigerians living in the UK? How does this affect me? Well, my mother is classed as a carrier of sickle cell disease. My mother has lost 3 siblings to this ruthless genetic disorder. To this date, she remembers carrying her 2-year-old sister to and from the hospital with her dad until her sister's untimely death. And to make it worse, no one had a clue what was going on, not even the doctors. In fact, superstition and juju, witchcraft, were associated with sickle cell children at the time in Nigeria. They, amongst other children who died early, were simply classed as 𝗤𝗂𝗏𝗁, an Igbo word translated to English as children who come and go. It wasn't until later on in my mom's early adult life did she take the initiative to test both her parents, as awareness of sickle cell disease was being raised all across Nigeria. The test revealed the mutated gene and sickle trait present in both her mom and her dad. Everything began to make more sense to her. The siblings she had lost had all suffered from sickle cell disease. My mom and her siblings who are alive today simply won the lottery that is genetics. My mom later discovered that she was a carrier of sickle cell. And so she was desperate to not start a family that associated childbirth with pain and loss. This led to her asking the seemingly bizarre question to my dad on their first date. Wait for it. What's your blood type? Lucky for her, my dad had the AA gene, meaning he was pretty much perfect. Not a carrier, not a sufferer, just perfect. Good to go. However, sickle cell disease does not just affect Africans in Africa. It is now classed as a medical emergency and is the world's most common genetic blood condition. Today, there are about 15,000 people in the UK living with sickle cell disease. yet only 5 approved treatments. A comparative genetic condition, cystic fibrosis, which I'm sure you've all heard of, is found predominantly in white people whose ancestors came from Northern Europe. There are about 10,500 people living with cystic fibrosis here in the United Kingdom, yet a whopping 511 approved treatments. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm more than happy that so much care and research has been taken towards such a severe condition like cystic fibrosis. However, I can't help but wonder why this same care and awareness has not been raised towards a very similar genetic condition. The fact is, race and sickle cell disease's low prevalence in the white population is the biggest factor as to why there is so little understanding and awareness of the disorder here in the United Kingdom. Sickle cell disease was first identified in the UK in the early 1950s, around the first big wave of Afro-Caribbean migrants. There was a general feeling amongst the British public that they had brought sickle cell into the country. And the general agreement between British healthcare professionals was that it simply wasn't important enough and a waste of British resources. Cystic fibrosis, on the other hand, was first discovered in the UK 2 whole decades later. Yet the speed at which research, care, and awareness rose in terms of cystic fibrosis was just significantly higher than that of sickle cell disease. There have just been several reports that indicate several years of substandard care, stigmatization, and lack of prioritization in terms of sickle cell disease. I quote the words of British social researcher in healthcare policy. Imagine you have a disease that leaves you in severe pain and frequently means you need emergency strong opioid pain relief, but your condition is rare and A&E staff often have very limited knowledge of your condition. And on top of that, you're black. And so staff assume you're drug seeking. And this happens over and over again. This is just one of the many ways patients with sickle cell disease face discrimination here in the United Kingdom. So what can be done to fix this? The NHS must reevaluate its current system to ensure that all healthcare workers are aware of severe diseases like sickle cell disease and do not allow racial bias and stereotype to affect the provision of care. This should be supported by improving the training and awareness of the management of sickle cell disorder crisis among secondary care staff, and undertaking more research to understand the impact of racism on the provision of care. I began my speech today with the mystery question that my mom had to ask my dad on their first date. I conclude my speech today hoping to have raised awareness so that 15,000 sufferers across the United Kingdom do not have to question whether the colour of their skin will dictate the quality of their healthcare. Thank you.
Once again, I turn to you, the audience, for one of our 3 questions. Sir, thank you.
If you have sickle cell, do you have anything to let the medical profession know that you've got it to go into the hospital so you're not stereotyped?
Well, that's a good question. So in Nigeria, for example, it will be common to get a blood test as soon as you arrive, and they test and they see if you've got SS, which is sickle cell genotype, or AA or AS. And as soon as they know you have SS, they go forward with their diagnosis from there. In the UK, it's not really the same. Like, even if they do take your blood type and they find out you have the SS gene, a lot of British healthcare professionals don't exactly know how to deal with sickle cell unless you're an expert hematologist. So if you're coming in for like just painkillers and stuff that can help deal with the pain, and you try and explain it to them, an A&E, someone who works in A&E doesn't know what this is about. Someone who's a paramedic probably doesn't know what this is about. So the problem is only the most specialized healthcare workers in the UK actually know about it. So what I'm getting at is educating everyone, from the lowest to the highest, whatever, educating everyone so they're aware, because it's not something that all healthcare professionals in the UK would know.
But do you think it can't be helped?
No, it's not. It's a genetic thing, so you can't really, like, solve it. There's gene therapies.
No, I
Sorry.
didn't mean it that way.
What?
You go into a hospital,
Yeah.
you want that pain relief. You don't want to be stereotyped.
Yeah.
But if you have a sickle cell card, would it help?
I think that something like that would definitely work, which is why I think it's good that I'm starting with raising awareness here, and that is such a good idea. So if that's like a snowball effect or something, that we talk about that a bit more. I feel like I didn't even think of that myself. I feel like the card idea is such a good thing to have. Okay, I have sickle cell, and you know, I think we can all spread that around, and that would be a good way to help.
Yes.
I've always heard it called sickle cell anemia. Is that, I mean, I always thought anemia was linked to white blood cells, but it's a red blood cell component. Is that right?
As far as I know, I think anemia is more to do with red blood cells actually. So it's called sickle. You could call it sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disorder, but anemia does have to do with red blood cells.
Thank you. That's correct.
Third question.
Many years ago, I was a medical student, and I did my pre-qualifying bit in West Middlesex Hospital, which is full of people with sickle cell anemia, being a very black area of, no offence, of London. And I had experience there of sickle cell anemia. Difficult to know what to say. There is a lot of anti-black people in London, and I fostered 2 of them, and we had great fun. But the anti-black just needs more. By the time my girls left school, they weren't shunned at all. They were just part of the living in. One of them came here. Don't know what else to say really about it, but certainly in West London they know all about sickle cell anemia.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, in terms of that's the problem with sickle cell anemia. There's geographical disparities in its treatment. So West London, a predominantly black area where you have nurses who are black, doctors who are black, who are aware of this disease. But if you go to a village, for example, in North Somerset, I can't count how many, first-line healthcare workers would actually know about it. And even as I told people, people would come to me, oh, what's your speech about? And I would say sickle cell disease. I'm like, huh? Like, what's that? And so I'm like, yeah, that's what it's about. The fact that you don't know what it's about. So, yeah, there's definitely that disparity in terms of geography and funding as well, which you wouldn't see with other similar genetic conditions. And that's mainly what I'm talking about, the inequality in that. Thank you.
I was 7 years old when I had my first encounter with extraterrestrial life. I was playing with my friends in the school field when we encountered a list of names chalked to the brick wall. Some were the names of my schoolmates and others we didn't recognise, all scrawled in this white, inhuman handwriting. Our shared sense of terror warned us to steer clear of this premonitory wall. But my curiosity overpowered the terror, and by the next day I was back, gazing with abject horror at a new list of names. This time, mine was among them. And when the list mysteriously vanished the following day, my theory was proven. Aliens. The humble reality of the situation, that it was just another child playing some mindless prank, never occurred to my young and fanciful mind. No, I was utterly convinced that it was aliens. I was somehow part of a cosmic event. It was a threat, a list of abductees, a sign that my time on Earth was soon to be interrupted by little green creatures with spindly fingers beaming me up into their flying saucers. It seems silly looking back on this now, but who could blame me? I had been raised amidst Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, Alien 1, Alien 2, even Alien 3. A cacophony of media which showed that, apart from E.T., aliens were out to do us no good. And as our ability to explore space developed in the latter half of the 20th century, we were left asking, well, what is really out there? And if one could argue that even the gods are a similar attempt to address this question, then it seems aliens has always been the answer. So why then do only 50% of Britons believe they actually exist? The reason, in my mind, is that our obsession with aliens has little to do with the creatures themselves. Instead, I believe the idea of supremely advanced beings who visit us and annihilate our planet is simply less terrifying than the other side of the coin, that we're alone. Well, tonight I would like to assuage that worry and do justice to my 7-year-old self by convincing you that yes, aliens really do exist. But then I'm afraid I would like to reinstate that worry once again and explain why we'll actually never find them. Now, for the record, I'm not a fanatic, though I recognise that's something a fanatic might say. But I don't believe in the Area 51, built the pyramids, steal your cow kind of aliens. What I believe in is a reality far more boring at first glance, but actually infinitely more interesting. I stand alongside the Brian Coxes and the Neil deGrasse Tysons in the belief that the universe is just too big for there not to be aliens. The universe is around 13.7 billion years old, but I feel that even in our modern society, we severely underestimate how big even just 1 billion is. So to put it into perspective, 1 million seconds is 12 days, while 1 billion seconds is around 31 years. The universe has been around for 13,700,000 millennium and is still expanding faster and faster. In the observable universe alone, there are between 200 billion to 2 trillion galaxies, and findings from the Kepler team at NASA estimated that there are 500 million planets in a habitable zone of just our galaxy alone. Overwhelming, right? But given how incomprehensibly huge the universe is to us, it seems almost ridiculous to argue that aliens aren't out there. So why haven't we heard from them? Well, it's not for a lack of trying on our part. In 1977, Jerry Emmon and his team identified a strong narrowband radio signal emanating from the direction of the Sagittarius constellation. He was so impressed by the signal that he circled it with the word wow, which is why it's now commonly referred to as the wow signal. Unfortunately for us, the wow signal wasn't E.T. trying to give us a ring on the cosmic telephone, and was likely just a space anomaly. But that didn't deter us, because in the following month, both Voyager spacecrafts were launched into space, each carrying a copy of the Golden Record. The record has 115 images and various musical selections from different eras and cultures from around the world, encoded on it in analog form. The purpose of the record was to educate aliens on human anatomy and human life. It was a way to introduce them to our planet and to our culture. It was a crude reaching out into space, simply to say, this is who we are, this is our planet, this is how you can find us. The record ends with audio of different greetings from around the world. A fitting way to end the records, should aliens ever listen to it. And that's exactly the problem. Dr. Carl Sagan, who chaired the committee working on the record, said, the spacecraft will be encountered and the record played only if there are advanced spacefaring civilizations in interstellar space. Not only is it immensely unlikely that it finds aliens in the first place, simply due to the vastness of space, but it would also have to be found by life intelligent enough to be able to decipher it and play it. You may be able to see by now how my argument is just two sides of the same coin, and the fact that the universe is too big for aliens not to exist, but also too big for us to ever find her. So keeping that in mind, I would like to revisit a topic from earlier, and that is the terror of being alone. A perfect topic for a Saturday evening. Now, I approach this with some caution, because I know that even hearing that word alone is enough to make some people shiver. Inside Microsoft's headquarters in Washington is the world's quietest room. It's a vacuum of sound which is so isolating that no one has yet withstood being inside it for more than 1 hour. It is the very definition of deafening silence. I like to think of Earth as being in that room, calling out into a dark, lifeless void with no hope of hearing a response. That's why I'm really fun at parties. I think this inability to accept our utter isolation has caused two distinctly opposing depictions of aliens. The first wants to believe that we have friends out there, other beings who can teach us how to explore the cosmos and perhaps share a can of space cola with us. And the second argues that whatever's out there can only be bad news for humankind. That's the shoot us with lasers and enslave the human race kind. The only issue I see with these two fears is that they neglect a third, more terrifying one. That even if life exists, we're just never going to find it. Why, you ask? Let me explain. The first reason is periodic extinction. The Earth has been through 5 main extinction events so far. And yes, that's including the dinosaurs. If that meteor hadn't come along, you could be listening to a hyper-intelligent velociraptor giving this talk. Sorry to disappoint. But that to me highlights just how fragile life is. Rocks many times smaller than our planet still have the power to wipe out entire species. So you could say it's a miracle that any species makes it this far in what is essentially a giant space pinball machine. The second reason is that space is just too big. It's so big that to measure distances in space, we have to consider how long it would take for light to get there, hence the term light years. If you somehow managed to travel at the speed of light, it would take you over 4 years to reach our closest star, Proxima Centauri. If you tried in the Voyager 1 spacecraft, it would take you 73,000 years. So it could be that aliens do exist, but the light which we see with, which first started shining 4.5 billion years ago, simply hasn't had the time to reach them yet. And finally, it has been speculated that perhaps aliens just don't want to be found, or at the very least, don't think we're worth their time. Maybe they think we're too dangerous, or perhaps they don't want to interrupt the natural evolution of our society. Or maybe they took one look at us and thought, oh, so these are the creatures that throw themselves down a hill after a wheel of cheese. We won't bother with those things. Think about it. If they are so intelligent that they are able to achieve interstellar travel, do you really think they'd make a pit stop to check out Earth? I mean, when was the last time you stopped to try and have a conversation with a colony of ants? So what do we do with all of this? How do we reconcile the fact that we probably won't fly a spaceship, or own an Iron Man suit, or have any friends other than ourselves? Well, in my mind, humanity doesn't have to fear being alone, or search for wonder in the cosmos. It's all right here already. We don't need aliens. Each and every one of you are made up of the materials and matter of the universe. You are the universe itself. And to me, that is the highest honor. Because life is so very rare and so very precious. And yet we get to experience it. So whether or not we'll find them, whether the universe is too big or our planet too small, the important thing is to never stop looking. From gazing at the stars thousands of years ago, wondering if Zeus was looking down on you, to names written in chalk on a brick wall, our sense of wonder should never, ever be lost. And by looking at the stars and wondering what's out there, We are discovering more and more about space every single day, but also more about ourselves. So, in a situation where I'm afraid I can't promise you Baby Yoda or your very own lightsaber, the one consolation I can offer is that amidst this chaotic, dark place that's had rocks flying around everywhere for billions of years, you ended up exactly here. You evolved to walk on two legs so that you could stand up and look at the stars. And they are awfully pretty. Thank you.
And for the final time this evening, I ask for the people in the audience or in a galaxy far, far away to offer 3 questions to our speaker. Yes, I can see one question at the back.
Hi, this is a lovely speech. I know the speech is great, by the way. So I have a question. So you know how the Voyagers 1 and 2 were sent in more than 3 decades ago? Do you think that we should, or NASA and every other space agency should work together to send another space probe to see if there's a possibility of finding aliens or anything resembling aliens or anything other than what we're able to universe? Because take a look at the Hubble Space Telescope, for instance, to give us a clearer view of what's out there as like an upgrade from like the field dot, which is the same other stuff that Carl Sagan also talks about. Do you think another space probe would perhaps answer the question?
I think it's important to always be trying to send more things out into space. There's going to come a time where it's not sustainable to live on this planet anymore, and we will have to try and travel to a new planet. Also, we should also just be seeing what's out there and seeing if we can find other life. The issue we have right now is that we're still in a very primitive age of technology. So the Voyagers, for example, they're not traveling very fast as far as things in space can travel. And if they encounter anything, it certainly won't be in our lifetime, and it will likely take thousands and thousands of years. I think every year there is more technology that's coming available to us, and we're constantly becoming more and more advanced. And with that technology, we should always be trying to pursue new things. I think it's important that we do send more things into space, because the more we do and the more we research, the more things we will find. But I think right now we're just too primitive to find anything of major significance that could really change how we live in this universe right now.
So I know in movies and stuff, we depict aliens as like green beings or like something disgusting. If we were to find aliens, which I know you say we won't, do you think they would look like us, or do you think that they would look like something completely different?
The first thing I always think of when I think of aliens, I don't know if any of you have watched the 𝗪𝗁, it's a Star Trek spoof. There's this character in it called 𝗪𝗁, and he's kind of like a humanoid kind of creature, but he has like thick skin and a wrinkly head. That's what I always think of, and I think in Hollywood films especially and shows, aliens are like depicted as humanoids, but realistically we have no way of knowing what aliens could look like, as I think it would vastly depend on how they evolved, whether they ate like us, whether they drank, whether they had the same atmosphere. So right now there's really no way of telling, I suppose.
Now, final question, please.
I think the hope is that we have friends out there, and they're kind toward us. We can establish like councils and have formal meetings and exchange our information. Of course, there's always the fear that whatever we encounter could be a threat, and they may want to wipe us out. But I think if we ever encounter aliens, our first thought is to try and establish friendly communications, and send over people who can work with communicating with them and translating them. And if they are a threat, we'd have to look into how we can accommodate for that and how we can reciprocate anything that they might throw at us.
Thank you very much.
When I was a little girl, 4 or 5, I used to love looking in jewellery shop windows and counters, especially at the diamonds. Me and my mother would look at them and talk about which ones we liked best. One day, a very helpful shop assistant came up to us and smiling sweetly said to me, "If you want a diamond like that when you grow up, you're going to have to marry a very rich man." Really? Even at that age, we're teaching young girls that they need to rely on a man to provide for them, to be successful. My mum, by the way, when she heard what the woman had said, turned to me and said, "Or, when you grow up, you could work really hard, have a fabulous career, and buy your own diamonds, like Mummy does." I remember my mum being so cross about what she'd said. I think that's really my first experience of being treated differently as a girl. But in truth, it's everywhere. We've just become so conditioned to accept it as normal that we barely notice it anymore. Whether it's a lack of investment in female entrepreneurs, the lack of recognition for female scholars, the lack of women in leadership roles and in boardrooms everywhere, or the lack of basic human rights or education in countries like Afghanistan or Syria. We are struggling for equality today as much as ever, and in every country in the world. The only way things will change is by being aware, calling out inequality wherever we see it, and challenging ourselves to do better. Feminism. Feminism is defined of the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. Equality of the sexes. How could anybody not be in support of that? And yet, in a recent YouGov poll, only 37% of women said that they were feminist. And almost a third of men in the UK say that feminism has done more harm than good. Think about that for a minute. Feminism, equality of the sexes, has done more harm than good. My name is Mistletoe. I am 14 years old, and even whilst at school, I have seen and experienced sexism and inequality firsthand. And I think about the future I am to grow up in, and the challenges I expect to face as I enter an adult in the working world. There are numerous issues I could discuss here in my talk today, but given the time that has been given to me, I have chosen to discuss just one. The disparity and inequity in the diagnosis of neurodiversity in girls and women. Did you know that until recently, it was only medically accepted that ADHD and autism was an issue for men and boys only, and only rarely ever seen in girls? This is now proven false, by the way. It's actually extremely common, just rarely diagnosed, and nearly always late. Over 80% of women with ADHD and autism go undiagnosed until adulthood, and are 3 times more likely to get a diagnosis than girls. Instead of getting diagnosed with autism, women and girls are much more likely to be misdiagnosed with conditions like borderline personality disorder, depression, anxiety, PTSD, or bipolar disorder. Of course, we as a society have a very long history of treating women and their healthcare differently than men. In Victorian times, thousands of women were locked away in lunatic asylums, suffering from hysteria. It was estimated that in the mid-19th century, 29% of all women were suffering from some form of hysteria. The reasons listed on the admissions papers make for a very interesting read. It could be anything from having seizures,
to reading too many books, changes in their menstruation, or having the gall to ask for a divorce. I wonder how a young woman back then would have been treated if she struggled with keeping eye contact, if she got panic attacks in noisy rooms and crowds of strangers, if she obsessed about a topic to the exclusion of all else and read every scrap of information that she could get her hands on, and if she could not stop talking endlessly about it, whether anybody wanted to hear it or not. Sounds like a candidate to the asylum for me. And this was happening even into the mid-19th century. Fortunately, we no longer consider wanting an education to be a mental illness. But even though we're not locking away women or performing electric shock therapy anymore, that misdiagnosis of anxiety or BPD can still be extremely harmful. Women with autism or ADHD are 2 times more likely to commit suicide. Women with both autism and ADHD are 5 times more likely to commit suicide. I know what that struggle is like. In the last few months, I have been diagnosed with both autism and ADHD. The diagnosis came 10 years after my mum first started pointing out to professionals that she was seeing some traits she thought were worth investigating. I got in trouble for talking too much in class all the time. It was only when my mum got called in to see the teacher that she was able to remind them that she asked them to keep an eye out for some traits as evidence of poor impulse control. When you think of a little child with ADHD, do you think of the stereotypical naughty little boy climbing the walls with too much energy to sit still in class? But I can tell you that for girls it is very different. It could be things like being disorganized, being forgetful, talking too much, or daydreaming. They say that girls learn to mask their symptoms more easily than boys. That doesn't mean that the problems aren't there. It just means that we are bottling them up, and people don't see it or understand it. When I was diagnosed, my psychiatrist said to me that the hardest thing that I will have to face is that people will never understand how hard everyday life is for me. When I started talking to people about my diagnosis, one of the teachers told me, "There's nothing wrong with you. You're just a normal, excitable young girl." So I guess that's what I project. I smile, I laugh, I join in, and I do my best to fit in. That's what people see, and they can easily accept that as fact, because it fits with the stereotype of what their idea of a normal girl should be. What you don't see is that I can feel every seam in my clothes, irritating, distracting, and taking up space in my head. What you don't see is that even while I'm talking to you now, a big chunk of my head is taken up thinking about bugs and reptiles. In my room at home, I have 2 pet tarantulas, Rosie and Cashew, a crested gecko, a royal python, stick bugs, and giant moths that I'm raising from pupae. I have been obsessed with bugs for as long as I can remember. When I was little, we visited Bristol Zoo, and I would always run straight to the bug house and happily stay there all day. My first pet was a cockroach. But I have to stop talking about bugs now, or we'd be here all night. Neurotypical people have interests. Neurodivergent people have hyperfixations. Bugs are definitely one of mine. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions on them later. What you also don't see is the space taken up in my head by constantly guessing and second-guessing what people mean by what they're saying, or what they're thinking, or how I'm supposed to react to what they say. So hopefully they keep thinking I'm normal. It's exhausting. I am exhausted. assumptions, stereotypes, and gender bias about how girls and boys should behave is damaging the mental and physical health of our children and perpetuating the cycle of sexism and inequality through the generations. I apologise if my talk paints a depressing picture, but this is our reality right now, and it won't get better by closing our eyes and minds to it. The latest reports from the UN in 2023 estimate that it will take another 130 years to reach anything like gender equality in our society, and over 285 years to close the gender pay gap. So, what can you do? Please, stay aware of these issues and learn more. I have barely scratched the surface today. There is so much more to explore and discuss. Check your bias. Call it out in yourself and one another. Be an ally. Be a feminist. And be kind to bugs. Yes, there is a feminist mountain to climb. But as I stand here today, I'm not discouraged. I am determined. I will grow up to be my authentic, neurodivergent self, standing with women all across the globe on one mission. And yes, I will buy my own diamonds. Thank you.
And again, I would ask for questions from the audience. We can allow 3 questions per candidate.
You mentioned this diagnosis of autism as anxiety. What would you say are the similar traits there, and why do doctors and psychiatrists tend to misdiagnose anxiety?
So autism is very separate for girls and boys, as I was saying. One of the main symptoms for autism with girls is that they experience anxiety, and the rates of depression for girls with autism is way higher than the rates of depression for maybe boys with autism. So I think it's traits like depression that we might see, because people who get diagnosed with anxiety, obviously, they're looking for getting nervous in crowded spaces. As I mentioned in my talk there, girls have like panic attacks in noisy rooms and crowds of strangers. And obviously because they're looking for that, that's why it might get diagnosed as anxiety.
How would you say that rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, which is common in ADHD, how would that present differently in girls and boys?
So if we look at, as you were saying, rejection sensitivity dysphoria in society, I feel there's a lot more pressure on girls to, look their best, and they feel pressure to put makeup on and be higher up, because that's how society has placed girls. And I think especially for girls with autism, feeling rejection from a society or the people around them will be 10 times more intense. And as for boys, because their society hasn't put them on that pedestal, then they may not feel as obliged to that.
The only term I'm confused with is feminism. What's that exactly mean?
Feminism, as I said, straight from my talk, feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. So that means feminism isn't fighting for women to be better than men or to be higher up than men in society. Feminists, me, and I'm sure a lot of other people in this room, men included, are fighting for women to simply be equal to men. And it scares me and saddens me that in some places in the world, even in this country, that still isn't happening.